The third is psychological, and it is the one Tehran feels most acutely. The regime's internal legitimacy rests substantially on the proposition that the IRGC can protect the country and impose costs on adversaries. 10 nights of footage showing IRGC headquarters burning is not a military problem. It is a domestic political problem, and it is a domestic political problem in a country with a long and recent history of internal unrest. The Amazon claim, the radar clearing framing, the multi-front announcements, all of it is aimed at least as much inward as outward. It is not designed to convince Washington. It is designed to convince Tehran. And here is why the simultaneous convergence matters more than any single track. Iran has historically been extraordinarily good at absorbing pressure sequentially. Sanctions come, and the regime adapts. Strikes come, and the regime disperses. Domestic unrest comes, and the regime represses. Each one individually is survivable because the resources used to manage one can be drawn from the others. What is happening now is that all three demands are arriving at once, and the resources that would normally be shifted to manage each one are already committed to managing the others. That is not additive pressure, it is multiplicative, which brings us to the question that actually determines what happens next. Who is in charge? The answer is more complicated than any headline. And it is the reason a ceasefire may not mean what anyone thinks it means. The Iranian security apparatus is not a single chain of command. It is at minimum two parallel structures sitting on top of a political leadership that arbitrates between them. There is the conventional military, and then there is the Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is not a branch of the military in any Western sense. It is a separate armed institution with its own ground forces, its own navy, its own aerospace force, its own intelligence directorate, its own economic empire, and its own direct line to the political leadership that bypasses the conventional defense establishment entirely. The ballistic missile program sits with the IRGC Aerospace Force. The Strait of Hormuz sits with the IRGC Navy, which operates the fast attack craft, the mining capability, and the coastal anti-ship missile batteries in the littoral. These are different organizations with different commanders, different institutional cultures, different equities, and different definitions of what constitutes an acceptable outcome. That structure works reasonably well in peacetime because the political leadership arbitrates. It works catastrophically badly under sustained communications degradation because arbitration requires the ability to communicate a decision downward and have it received, understood, and obeyed. And that brings us back to the detail I flagged earlier, the one that matters more than any battle damage assessment. The IRGC was publishing claims about Night 10 while Night 10 was still in progress. Think about what that requires, organizationally. It requires a media apparatus operating on a pre-written timeline, generating output on schedule, independent of what is actually happening on the ground. It means the messaging is not downstream of the operational picture. It is running in parallel to it, on its own track, disconnected. An organization whose public communications are decoupled from its operational reality is an organization whose internal communications are almost certainly degraded too. You do not get one without the other. 10 nights of systematic strikes against command and communications infrastructure will do exactly that, and what it produces is not surrender. It produces autonomy. Subordinate commanders who cannot reach higher headquarters start operating on last known intent, and last known intent in the IRGC is not moderate. This is the single most important thing to understand about the current moment, and almost nobody is saying it. So here is the honest strategic assessment, and it is not the version either side is selling. The IRGC is degraded. It is not disarmed. Night 10's counterstrike, whatever its actual effect, demonstrated the ability to generate a coordinated multi-front missile and drone campaign against multiple countries simultaneously, and reporting still places roughly 2,000 ballistic missiles in inventory. Anyone telling you this is over is not reading the same numbers. A force with 2,000 missiles and a functioning launch capability is a force that can still kill Americans, and it already has. At the same time, anyone telling you Iran is winning is describing a country that is currently begging 3 separate governments to ask for a pause on its behalf while offering, as a concession, free transit through a strait it no longer controls. Those are not the actions of a force with options. Those are the actions of a force trying to buy time to reconstitute, and every serious analyst on both sides of this knows exactly what a pause would be used for. Dispersal, reconstitution, resupply, reconstruction of the command architecture that 10 nights of strikes have taken apart. That is the actual fork in the road over the next 72 hours, and it is a genuinely hard call rather than an obvious one, which is why the debate about it is legitimate rather than performative. The case for taking the off-ramp is real. 50,000 Americans are in range. 2 are already dead. Every additional night is another opportunity for a lucky ballistic missile to find a barracks, and the escalation ladder above where we currently sit gets very ugly very quickly. Wars that continue past the point of achieving their military objectives have a long history of producing outcomes nobody wanted. And there is a defensible argument that 10 nights of degradation has already accomplished the strategic purpose, and that continuing past that point converts a successful campaign into an open-ended commitment. The case against it is equally real, and it comes down to a single question. Is the request being made in good faith, or is it a tactic? An off-ramp offered to an adversary who intends to use it as an exit is a strategic success. An off-ramp offered to an adversary who intends to use it as a rest stop is a strategic error that gets paid for later, with interest, by whoever is deployed at that time. The historical record on Iranian ceasefire compliance is the entire basis of the skepticism, and the fact that the request is being routed through 3 intermediaries rather than made directly is itself evidence about intent. This is the same logic that produced the earlier threats against the undersea fiber optic cables connecting the Middle East to the rest of the global network. It is the same logic that produces every threat against commercial infrastructure. It is the strategy of a force that has lost the ability to impose military cost and has pivoted to imposing economic and psychological cost on the civilian and corporate world instead. It is not an escalation of capability. It is a substitution for capability. And the American answer to that substitution was to release strike footage. Not a rebuttal, not a statement. Footage, IRGC headquarters burning, ballistic missile storage sites burning, and, according to the material, an underground drone facility that the IRGC had publicly showcased only days earlier at Tabriz Air Base struck almost immediately after it was displayed. That sequence is the entire war in miniature. Iran displays a capability to prove it still exists. The capability is destroyed because it was displayed. And the destruction is then displayed in turn. There's a name for what that dynamic does to an adversary's decision cycle. It collapses it. It makes every act of demonstration an act of self-targeting. And once that becomes true, a force loses the ability to signal strength at all without paying for it in equipment. That is a strategically catastrophic position, and it is the position the IRGC is currently occupying. Now let's talk about the platforms doing this, because the choice of aircraft in this campaign is itself a message, and the message is aimed at exactly one audience. The F-35 is functioning as the workhorse of this operation in all 3 variants, operating from land bases, from carriers, and from amphibious decks. What makes it decisive here is not stealth and isolation, it is the sensor architecture. The aircraft carries a distributed aperture system that gives the pilot the ability to look through the airframe itself, with imagery projected onto the helmet, meaning the pilot's field of view is not limited by the physical geometry of the cockpit. Combine that with the aircraft's radar, its electronic support measures, and its ability to fuse and share that picture across a formation, and the platform stops being a strike fighter that carries sensors. It becomes a sensor that carries weapons. That distinction is why the campaign is able to run for 10 consecutive nights against a dispersed target set. The aircraft that finds the target and the aircraft that kills the target do not have to be the same aircraft, and neither of them has to be in the same place as the aircraft that is jamming, or the ship that is providing air defense, or the drone that is holding the pattern overhead. Which brings us to the ISR layer. High-resolution intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance is what turns a dispersed target set from an impossible problem into a list. MQ-9 orbits provide persistent stare. The F-35s themselves contribute organic ISR from inside the threat envelope, which is the piece that hardened dispersal was never designed to defeat. Iran built its concealment architecture against a threat model that assumed intermittent overhead coverage and reactive strikes. It did not build it against continuous, penetrating networked observation that never leaves. You cannot hide from a system that is always looking and never has to guess where to look next. Then there is the F-16CJ, the Wild Weasel mission, and this is the aircraft that makes the rest of it possible. The Weasel mission exists for one purpose: to hunt the surface-to-air missile systems and the radars that protect everything else. It is the most aggressive mission profile in aviation because the tactic, fundamentally, is to make yourself the target so the enemy emitter reveals itself, and then to kill the emitter before it kills you. Every night that mission runs successfully is a night the rest of the package operates in air that is measurably less lethal than it was the night before. And you can see the cumulative effect of that in the target set. When a campaign moves from air defense suppression to command centers to production infrastructure, it is telling you that the air defense problem has been substantially reduced. You do not go after deep, fixed, high-value infrastructure, while the integrated air defense network is still intact. The progression of targets is a battle damage assessment all by itself. Layered on top of that, FA-18s employing air-launched cruise missiles, weapons in the 1,000-pound warhead class, and the critical attribute there is standoff. Iran's most rational defensive play has been to ring its remaining ballistic missile infrastructure with as much surface-to-air coverage as it can generate, forcing attacking aircraft to fly into the densest possible threat. Standoff weapons defeat that logic entirely. The launching aircraft never enters the envelope. The missile does. It flies dozens of miles at low altitude and removes the air defense node protecting the actual target, at which point the actual target is prosecuted by a different aircraft entirely, using targeting data generated by a third. None of that works without the network, and the network is the part of this campaign that almost nobody talks about, because it is invisible in footage. Think about the Aegis-equipped warships currently operating in support of the maritime component. Their value is not only the missiles in their vertical launch cells, it is that they are nodes. They see, they share, they queue, and they receive queuing in return. A track detected by an aircraft can be engaged by a ship. A track detected by a ship can be engaged by an aircraft. The picture in the cockpit and the picture in the Combat Information Center are the same picture. That is the actual American advantage in this fight, and it is the one thing Iranian dispersal was never able to plan around. You can bury a missile, you can camouflage a launcher, you can build 1,000 bunkers with $500 million a day. What you cannot do is buy an equivalent to a fully integrated real-time multi-domain targeting network, because that is not a purchase. It is 30 years of institutional investment, doctrine, and training, and there is no supplier who sells it. The result is a war where one side is fighting with equipment, and the other side is fighting with a system. Now here is the operational picture in hard numbers, and this is where the strategic reality separates from both sides' narratives. 10 consecutive nights of continuous air operations. Night 10 running from 4 to 9 o'clock Eastern on July the 20th. Approximately 50,000 American personnel in theater. Roughly 900 vessels facilitated through the Strait of Hormuz since early May. Approximately 450 million barrels of crude moved through that transit. Iranian oil revenue in the range of $500 million per day, sourced primarily through China. Remaining Iranian ballistic missile inventory reported at close to 2,000. 2 American service members confirmed killed by Iranian fire, with the Army having released their names. One an Army first lieutenant, 25 years old, the other a private, 19 years old. That number is not a statistic, and it should not be read like one. Every operational figure in this script describes a system. That one describes a life and a family and a unit that is still out there tonight, doing the job with an empty space in the formation. Whatever anyone believes about the strategy, the policy, or the politics of this campaign, that cost is real, and it is being paid by a very small number of people on behalf of everyone else. Now, the convergence, because the reason this is happening now, and the reason Tehran is scrambling for an off-ramp through 3 separate intermediaries, is that 3 distinct pressure tracks have arrived at the same moment. The first is financial. The strait is open, and it is being kept open by someone else. That is not merely a lost revenue opportunity. It is the collapse of Iran's primary strategic instrument. The entire deterrent logic of the Iranian position for 4 decades has been the implicit threat to the global energy supply, and 900 escorted transits have converted that threat from a fear into a demonstrated non-event. Markets price fear. They do not price disproven fear. Every additional convoy that completes transit devalues the threat permanently, and that devaluation does not reverse when the shooting stops. The second is military. 10 nights of continuous prosecution against command nodes, production sites, storage sites, and air defenses does not simply subtract equipment. It subtracts the ability to organize equipment. A dispersed force is only survivable if it can be coordinated, and coordination requires communications infrastructure that has been under systematic attack for 10 consecutive nights. What is being destroyed is not just the missiles. It is the connective tissue that turns 2,000 individual missiles into a coherent campaign rather than a collection of isolated launches. 2,000. After 10 nights. That number should tell you exactly how much was built and exactly how long it was allowed to be built without interruption. This is what happens when a program like this is left alone for decades. It does not sit still. It metastasizes. It spreads laterally into hundreds of sites, thousands of bunkers, redundant command nodes, and dispersed storage across an entire country, until at some point the arithmetic of stopping it stops being a raid and starts being a campaign. That is precisely where we are. Not a strike, not a retaliation, a campaign. So let's establish exactly where things stand as of today, because the specifics matter more than the narrative from either direction. Night 10 opened at 4 o'clock Eastern Time on July the 20th. F-35s, F-16s, warships, precision munitions. The target set was command and control centers, maritime capabilities, missile and drone production and storage sites, and integrated air defense systems, and the geographic spread was national rather than regional. Strikes concluded at approximately 9 o'clock Eastern, 5 hours of continuous prosecution across a country the size of Alaska. And while American aircraft were still aggressing, the IRGC was already publishing. That timing is not incidental. It is the single most revealing operational detail in this entire sequence, and we will come back to it. because it tells you something about the state of the Iranian command structure that no battle damage assessment could tell you. What the IRGC claimed was a multi-front counterstrike. Ballistic missiles and drones launched at U.S. military positions across the region, with claimed impacts in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan, specifically against radar installations. And then, layered on top of that, the Amazon claim in Bahrain. As of right now, neither the United States, nor Bahrain, nor Amazon has confirmed that any Amazon infrastructure was struck. What is documented in the reporting is that Iran targeted it. Targeting and hitting are two entirely different things, and the gap between them is where the entire Iranian information campaign lives. Approximately 50,000 American service members are currently in the region. That is the number that turns this from a headline into something with weight, and it is the number that makes the next 72 hours matter more than anything that has happened in the last 10 nights. Because Iran has stopped fighting for territory. It is now fighting for time. Now let's talk about what nobody in the mainstream conversation is connecting, which is the ceasefire proposal, and specifically who is carrying it. According to the material, Iran is currently pressing Qatar, Egypt, and Pakistan to submit a ceasefire proposal on its behalf, not with Iran as the signatory, not with Iran as the requesting party, with those three states presenting the proposal as though the initiative originated with them. Go through what that actually means, point by point, because each element is doing separate work. First, the request itself. A state that is winning does not need a proxy to ask for a pause. A state that is winning does not need the pause at all. The very existence of this request, routed through third parties, is an admission of operational condition that no IRGC press release will ever make explicitly. The claim being made publicly is strength. The behavior being exhibited privately is exhaustion. When those two things contradict each other, the behavior is the data, and the claim is the noise. Second, the routing. Asking Qatar, Egypt, and Pakistan to front the proposal is not diplomacy. It is laundering. The purpose is to strip the request of its origin so that the pause, if it happens, does not read as capitulation inside Iran and does not read as concession pressure inside Washington. It converts a plea into an initiative. It converts weakness into the appearance of regional consensus. And it does one more thing that matters enormously. It distributes the political cost of refusal. If the United States declines a request from Iran, that is a military decision. If the United States declines a proposal from 3 regional partners, that is a diplomatic problem with allies. Same answer, entirely different price. Third, and this is the part that most coverage has skipped entirely, the proposal reportedly contains a provision allowing shipping to flow freely through the Strait of Hormuz on the southern and central routes. Read that carefully, because that single provision inverts the entire logic of the request. Iran is asking for a ceasefire, and the price it is offering to pay is a guarantee of something it has already lost. 900 vessels have already transited, 450 million barrels have already moved. The strait is already open, and it is being kept open by American maritime power, not by Iranian permission. So Tehran is walking into a negotiation offering to sell the buyer something the buyer already owns and is currently holding by force. That is not a concession. That is a receipt. And it tells you what Tehran actually wants out of a ceasefire, which is not the strait. It is the sky. 10 nights of continuous air operations are doing something to the Iranian military apparatus that cannot be repaired while the operations continue. Dispersal only works if you can move. Concealment only works if you have time to conceal. Reconstitution only works if the reconstitution sites survive. Every hour of continuous air pressure denies all 3. A ceasefire does not stop the war for Iran. A ceasefire restarts the clock on the ability to hide. And that is worth more to them right now than any provision about shipping lanes. Now let's talk about the language they chose, because this is where the real story sits. The IRGC has characterized its missile and drone launches as a radar clearing operation, suppression of enemy air defenses, a seed campaign in the professional vocabulary. They announced it, publicly, in advance and during. Read that again. A military force conducting a genuine suppression campaign against enemy air defenses does not announce it, cannot announce it. The entire premise of suppression is tactical surprise, because the systems being suppressed are mobile, because the emitters being hunted go silent the moment they know they are being hunted, and because the window between detection and destruction is measured in minutes. Announcing a SEAD campaign is functionally identical to announcing an ambush. It defeats the thing it claims to be doing. And there is a second problem, which is more fundamental. Ballistic missiles are not suppression weapons. They are area weapons with long flight times, fixed trajectories, and no capacity to prosecute a target that is relocated between launch and impact. Modern air defense radars and the associated launchers are designed to shoot and scoot precisely because of this. The probability of a ballistic missile finding a mobile emitter that has moved since the targeting solution was generated is not low. It is close to theoretical. So the IRGC is describing an operation it cannot execute with the weapons it is using against targets that will not be there when the weapons arrive. Which means this was never a seed campaign. It was an information operation with warheads attached. And that reframing explains the Amazon claim completely. Because if you cannot destroy the American ability to see, and you cannot destroy the American ability to strike, and you cannot close the strait, then the only remaining theater where you can generate the appearance of effect is the theater of perception. And the perception target with the highest yield per unit of effort is not a military installation. It is a brand name. Nobody outside a targeting cell knows what a specific radar site is worth. Everybody knows what Amazon is. It is July 22nd, 2026, and the footage coming out of Iranian airspace right now does not look like a warning. It looks like an inventory being deleted. F-35s and F-16s running precision strike packages through defended airspace. Ballistic missiles going up in flames on the ground before they ever leave their launchers. Deep mountain bunkers, hardened, buried, camouflaged, built specifically to survive exactly this, opening up in secondary explosions that keep cooking off long after the aircraft have egressed. 10 consecutive nights, on time, on target, every single night. But that is not the detail that stopped everything cold. Somewhere in the middle of night 10, while American strike aircraft were still inside Iranian airspace, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps put out a claim that had nothing to do with radar sites, nothing to do with airfields, and nothing to do with any military target on any map. The claim was that they had destroyed Amazon data center infrastructure in Bahrain. Read that again. Not a base, not a runway, not a carrier, a cloud provider. The IRGC just told the world it took a shot at the internet, and the American response to that claim was not a press conference, not a denial, and not a diplomatic note. The response was strike footage, more of it, released deliberately. And the message inside that release is the entire story of where this war is right now. But let's back all the way up, because to understand what just happened in the last 36 hours, you need to understand what has been building for months, and why the target set, shifting from missile silos to server racks, is not a random escalation. It is a confession. This did not start 10 nights ago. 10 nights ago is only when the air campaign became continuous. What came before that was a slow, grinding maritime confrontation that most of the world watched with one eye while the actual center of gravity moved somewhere else entirely. Since early May, according to the material, U.S. 2 Central Command has facilitated the transit of roughly 900 vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. 900. That is not a symbolic escort mission. That is a sustained convoy operation running continuously through the single most contested waterway on the planet. And it has moved something in the neighborhood of 450 million barrels of crude through a choke point that Tehran has spent 40 years telling the world it could close whenever it wanted. 450 million barrels. Through the strait, Iran said it owned. That number is the humiliation nobody in Tehran can talk about publicly, and it explains almost everything that has happened since. Because the entire strategic value of the Iranian position, the entire reason the regime has been treated as a regional power rather than a heavily armed regional problem, rests on one single premise. The premise that Iran can impose unacceptable cost on the global economy at a time of its choosing. Close the strait, spike the price of oil, force the world to negotiate. That premise is being disproven in public, one convoy at a time. And it has been disproven for months. And here is where it gets significantly worse for them. While the strait stayed open, the money kept moving in the other direction too. The material puts Iranian oil revenue at roughly $500 million a day, flowing primarily from China. And that revenue stream is the engine that built everything now being destroyed. $500 million a day converted over years into hardened dispersal sites, into mobile launchers, into drone assembly lines buried under mountains, into a ballistic missile inventory, large enough that after 10 consecutive nights of sustained precision strikes, reporting still puts the remaining stockpile at close to 2,000 missiles.